that you're trying to determine what kids are learning and whether they're learning at a high level, and then holding folks accountable for trying to get them to learn at a high level. We collect a lot of data now. A lot of places collect a lot of data and don't do much with it. We're trying to use data for information purposes to drive change. So the place we started with accountability in the main is the principals. The principals are probably at the center of a majority of our reform efforts and certainly of the accountability efforts. The plan, you can go ahead, Mark, see what it says. Keep going. The plan on principals is soup to nuts. It is to recruit, train, evaluate, and support principals and hold them accountable for academic achievement. If you just look back a few years, principals were not necessarily trained to be instructional leaders. In the old days, principals were managers. They were supposed to make sure the food was hot, the buses ran on time, etc. So the idea that a principal needs to be able to walk into a classroom and observe instruction and work with that teacher to make sure that instruction is of a high quality and is being absorbed by every student in the room is a relatively recent concept. It's certainly, unfortunately, a relatively recent concept to Pittsburgh. So we had to start recognizing that when we got here, there was essentially no principal evaluation system. There was no principal professional development system. It was probably, well, it was one of the weakest areas. So it may be the area that I'm proudest of in terms of where we have got. I'm not going to necessarily follow all that is here, but you can understand that if you're collecting data and if you're assessing how kids are doing, but you have no mechanism to hold anybody accountable for changing, then it's not a very worthwhile system. And I can promise you, as odd as it sounds, if you go to any system where all the adults in the system are happy and content, you've usually got a problem. Because there is a dynamic in a system in which, unfortunately, there needs to be the rub and grind of accountability, which is people being held responsible for whether things are working or not. Now, in the case of principals, you want it to be a little bit more complex and subtle than just a heavy-handed evaluation system. For one, really good principals don't lead with the concept that telling everybody what to do is leadership. They create a collective, collaborative sense of responsibility for student achievement in their schools, or what we in this business call professional learning communities. They have an instructional cabinet. All of our schools are supposed to have instructional cabinets. Some are very effective and meet often and do what we want them to do, which is wrestle with the results in the school, together, collaboratively.
What's
yes?
The instructional cabinet?
Instructional cabinet is actually in the contract with the union and written in various other places in the district's agenda, but it includes a number of, I mean, it's different, it is not a prescription for what it must consist of, but it's teachers, assistant principal, counselor, social worker, and the principal. Some schools actually have instructional cabinets and additional forms of folks who sit and wrestle with the data, but most have just one. And the point of it is to have collaborative leadership to solve the school's problems. And we know that schools that are successful in the main have that. There are some schools that are very successful that have a more dictatorial approach, but it doesn't tend to last as long or build the kind of culture in a school that delivers high student achievement over the long haul. So, the soup to nuts piece about the principals, and you know, you keep going because I'm not finding myself in time. Well, there it is. PULSE, Pittsburgh Urban Leadership System for Excellence. A pipeline. You know, we have seen turnover in principals. We wanted that. In the main, it has been good. But it's one thing to have turnover, and it's another thing to have folks whom you're happy replacing principals with, right? So mostly, not totally, people won't move very far for a principalship. So mostly you have to build your own supply. So we created the Pella program, which is again funded by both federal dollars and Broad Foundation dollars. And it puts aspiring principals who may or may not be assistant principals and who may or may not be yet certified, because we've partnered with Duquesne in a certification program, but who go through a very rigorous, and it is very rigorous, application process to be chosen for the program. We had, I'm sorry, I'm going to blank on the numbers as to how many we had last year and how many we had this year. We have fewer this year because we expect to have less principal turnover this year. Last year was our first year of evaluations, and we had a reasonable number of demotions, but also people who chose to leave of their own accord. We do not expect to have that many this year, so we have a smaller class of Pella. I can tell you that our Pella principals that are in place now are on the whole among our finest principals. They are not, of course, consistent or exactly the same, but it's a really fine group. Lots of places will trump and claim that merit-based compensation systems alone will produce what we want out of principals. I don't believe that. The supposition, if you do believe that, is that principals are only motivated by monetary rewards, which I think is a false supposition. We believe that the merit pay system that we've evaluated and developed, which is basically based on student achievement and how the principals satisfy the rubric, work in collaboration with support and help. So working with the principals and working with an outside consultant, we did arrive at a rubric to judge principal performance. And satisfaction of that rubric is a part not only of their compensation, but more importantly about what supports they get. So a principal may be very strong in some areas, parent communication, and they may be strong in morale boosting and culture building, but they may be weak in data analysis and use of data analysis to drive change in the classroom. So the point isn't just to dock their pay or their bonus. The point is that they then get mentored and helped in the areas that they're weak. So it's built around the premise that people want to be good, and that in the main, most of them can be good, but they probably haven't received the significant training that they need in certain areas. Now, there are some principals who just do not have either the capacity or the combination of capacity, energy, desire, and commitment to be effective school leaders. And those folks, we are going to move out. They don't have a business being school principals. But the point of the system is not just to move out the truly non-performers. It's to also build the capacities of other folks. And this all works together based on that premise. And they do get a lot of help during this time. We now have 4 executive directors who oversee the 66 schools, and all 4 of them spend an enormous amount of time in schools, and we also now have these teaching and learning teams that also go to schools and work on evaluating and helping to further what is happening in the schools or not happening in the schools. Okay, I won't spend too much time on this, but there are a lot of changes in how we're doing it now. Much more extensive training and support, much more extensive mentoring, very intensive mentoring for principals in their first 2 years, by the way, what we call novice principals. There were only 2 categories of performance before, now there are 4: rudimentary, emerging, proficient, and accomplished. This system has actually now gotten a good amount of national notice, and we are being asked to go to other places and help other folks design and think about how to do this. So,